We're talking about Nolan Wells. Teenager ended up dying in Mississippi on a boating trip during 4th of July weekend. It was ruled a death investigation and not a homicide, and that just did not play well with the family. So they ended up hiring famous civil rights attorney Ben Crump to handle the case. And we heard some very interesting things because Ben Crump just happens to be here in Chicago, where they released some of the findings of this independent autopsy here.
There's a moment in this case that nobody really talks about properly, and it happened in a room in Washington, D.C. on the 10th of July. A pathologist the family had hired themselves, Dr. Roger A. Mitchell Jr., was standing over the body of an 18-year-old boy from Ocean Springs, Mississippi. He was there because Nolan Wells' parents had stopped believing they would be told the truth by anyone else. So they paid for their own answers. They flew their son's body across the country to get them, and when he went looking at the front of Nolan's neck, it wasn't there. Not damaged. Gone. Removed 6 days earlier during the state's own autopsy, and kept back in Mississippi, sitting in a jar in a medical examiner's office. The airway, the vessels, the hyoid bone, that small curved bone behind your throat that pathologists check first when they're asked whether someone was strangled. All of it retained. None of it available to the man the family had hired. Now, I want to be careful here, because this is exactly where this case keeps going wrong. Retaining tissue is normal. Pathologists do it every week. It is not a cover-up, and no serious person has said it was. But normal and harmless aren't the same thing. What it meant on that day, in that room, was that the one part of Nolan's body that could have answered the question everybody was asking was the one part his family's pathologist was never allowed to see. So he wrote down that he couldn't rule out injury to the neck. And by that evening, people online had turned that sentence into something it doesn't say. Sit with the difference for a second, because it's the whole case. I found nothing is a finding. I wasn't given the chance to look is not. Those are not the same sentence, and they never have been. Then a second pathologist stepped in, Dr. Judy Melinek. No connection to this case, nobody paying her, nothing to gain from it. And what she explained is that even the things people are still waiting on, the toxicology, the numbers, the report that's supposedly going to settle everything, may not settle anything at all. She'll tell you why herself, and I think it's the most honest thing anyone has said about this case so far. Meanwhile, everything else kept moving. A judge in Jackson County was reading messages about a package coming to her office. Federal agents were following an email address 2,000 miles west to a street in Sacramento. And in Cincinnati, standing in front of about 100 strangers at Fountain Square, Nolan's mother said something out loud that she'd been quietly saying to her own children for years, long before any of this reached her front door. Christine and Elmore Wansley aren't following this case. They're living inside it, and as I record this, they still have not been shown what the state of Mississippi found when it opened their son's body on the 7th of July. That report is finished. It exists. They just aren't allowed to read it. Quick note before we go on. This is the death of a young man and an open investigation, so there's nothing graphic in this video. Court documents, named professionals, on-the-record statements only, and I'll tell you plainly whenever something isn't confirmed. Welcome back to The Crime Executioner. I'm glad you're here for this one. I don't guess on these cases, and I don't run ahead of the evidence. If that's how you want this handled, subscribe before we start. If you're new to this case, here is everything you need, and nothing you don't. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old, from Ocean Springs, Mississippi. He played football at Ocean Springs High School and had gone on to Southwest Mississippi Community College, where he was a wide receiver. His parents are Christine Wansley and Elmore Wansley Sr. If the surnames catch you, that's a family matter and nothing more. There's no mystery in it. On the 4th of July, 2026, Nolan went out to Horn Island. It sits about 10 miles off the Gulf Coast, a barrier island reachable only by boat, and on a holiday weekend it fills up. He went with a group of friends, spread across 3 boats. He didn't come back with them. His mother reported him missing that night. Search efforts began quickly. Alongside local law enforcement, volunteers from the United Cajun Navy went out over the island by boat and by aircraft. Brian Trasher, the organization's national vice president, said they'd been in contact with Christine Wansley from the night the report came in. On the morning of the 6th, a National Park Service ranger found Nolan in the water, off the northwestern tip of the island. Jackson County Coroner Bruce Lind confirmed the identification through dental records. And here's a detail that gets skipped over. Lynn said his office asked for the autopsy to be done at the state medical examiner's office because of the condition the body was found in, and specifically to establish whether there was any trauma or any sign of foul play. So investigators were not casual about this. They said early on they suspected a drowning, but they went looking for the alternative anyway. Which raises the obvious question. If the state was already asking that question, why did his family pay to fly their son's body across the country to ask it again? The state's examination happened on the morning of the 7th of July at the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office Coast Lab. That was the first one. The second came 3 days later, on the 10th, in Washington, D.C. By then, 6 days had passed since Nolan went missing, and 4 since he was found. And when Dr. Roger Mitchell began his examination, he documented what wasn't available to him. Organs had been removed during the first autopsy, including the lungs. So had the neck structures. Mitchell was careful in how he wrote this. He noted that retaining those structures is common forensic pathology practice. He didn't frame it as wrongdoing, and neither will I. But he also recorded the consequence plainly. Without them, he could not determine whether Nolan had a neck injury. And without the lungs, he could not determine whether water had entered them. That second point deserves a moment. Water in the lungs is one of the things a pathologist looks for when assessing a drowning. Mitchell could not check. Let me explain why the neck matters so specifically, because most people have never had a reason to know this. The neck has 2 very different halves. The back is mostly muscle and spine. It's associated with blunt injury or spinal damage. The front is where the important structures sit, the airway, the major blood vessels, and the hyoid bone, a small, curved, fragile bone that sits behind the throat and can fracture under sustained pressure. When a pathologist is asked to assess whether someone was strangled, the front of the neck is where the answer lives. That's the portion that stayed in Mississippi. What Mitchell could examine, he examined. He found no apparent lacerations, no fractures, no deep tissue injuries. He also noted something important about the limits of that finding, which is that decomposition can obscure whether bruising is present or absent on the skin surface, and that this becomes more pronounced during a second examination. He did record one observation. An area of red discoloration at the back of the head. He did not say what caused it. It's an observation, not a conclusion, and I want to be precise about that because a great deal has been built on top of it since. Now, the state has responded, and its response deserves to be heard directly. The Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office said its autopsy was performed in accordance with the standard procedures and protocols followed for all autopsies. It declined to comment on the independent examination, and it asked the public to stay patient and to avoid drawing conclusions before the investigation is finished. So look at where that leaves us. The state says its procedure was standard. The family's own pathologist says the practice is common. Those 2 statements agree. Nobody is disputing either one. Which brings the real question into focus, and it's a narrower one than the internet has been asking. If this practice is routine, and nobody contests that it is, why does it matter so much in this particular case? Because routine and harmless are not the same thing. Let me lay the dates out flat, because the sequence itself tells you something. July 4th, the boat trip. Nolan reported missing that night. July 6th, his body recovered, identified through dental records the same day. July 7th, the state autopsy, that morning. July 8th, 2 days after their son was found, Christine and Elmore Wansley retained Ben Crump. July 10th, the independent autopsy in Washington, D.C. July 22nd, Crump announces the preliminary findings in Chicago. July 23rd, the district attorney makes her first public statement about how this case is being handled. July 30th, officials confirm the state's autopsy is complete. July 31st, Cincinnati, under 4 weeks, start to finish. And notice how fast the family moved at the front end. 48 hours after being told their son was dead, they had hired a national civil rights attorney. Whatever you make of that, it wasn't a decision made slowly. But there's one interval on that list that matters more than the others, and it's the smallest one. July 7th to July 10th, 3 days between the 2 examinations. And by the time Mitchell began, Nolan's body had already spent 2 days in the Gulf before recovery, and 4 days beyond that. In pathology, that gap isn't neutral. It isn't a scheduling detail. Every day between death and examination changes what a body can still tell you, and it only ever changes in one direction. Mitchell recorded the effect of that himself. But he wasn't the only pathologist watching this case. And he wasn't the only one thinking carefully about what those days had cost. Here is what Mitchell actually wrote. Cause of death, undetermined pending investigation. Manner of death, undetermined pending investigation. He could not rule out injury to the neck as a contributor or a cause. He could not rule out that non-accidental factors contributed to or caused the death. Ben Crump described the findings as inconclusive pending further investigation, and called on state officials to share what they had found with Mitchell. Now, this is the part of the case I keep coming back to, because it's where almost every version of this story goes sideways. An examination that looked and found nothing is a finding. An examination that was never able to look is a limitation. Those are not the same sentence. They don't mean the same thing, they don't carry the same weight, and one of them is not evidence of anything at all. Within hours of that Chicago press conference, the second sentence was being circulated as though it were the first. And other pathologists have said so, in both directions. Dr. Michael Baden, one of the best-known forensic pathologists in the country, said Mitchell was reaching, and that the findings are consistent with the accounts from local law enforcement describing an accidental death. Dr. Priya Banerjee said second autopsies carry an inherent limitation, simply because of what a body has already been through during the first examination. Dr. Michelle Dupre put it more bluntly. She said the missing neck structures hamper the second autopsy and prevent it from giving real results. But she also said something that gets left out when her comments are quoted. She said she understands why the original pathologist retained them, so sit with where the expert opinion actually lands. Baden thinks the report overreaches. Dupre thinks the report couldn't reach far enough. Banerjee thinks that's the nature of any second autopsy. Not one of them has said Nolan Wells was strangled. Not one of them has said he wasn't. That's the honest position, and it's an uncomfortable one, because it doesn't resolve into a headline, which leaves a harder question underneath. Some of what a body can tell you is gone now, permanently, taken by time and water. So what's actually left to learn, and where would it come from? There's a third voice worth bringing in here, and I want to explain why before I get to what she said. Dr. Judy Melinek is a board-certified forensic pathologist and the president and chief executive of Pathology Expert, Inc. She was not hired by the family. She was not hired by the state. She has no connection to this case at all, and she has been clear that she has not examined Nolan's body and has not seen the state's report. She has nothing to gain from either conclusion. That's precisely why she's worth listening to. Speaking to ABC News, Melinek addressed the discoloration at the back of the head, the observation that has generated more speculation than anything else in Mitchell's report. Her point was about the word undetermined. She said that when a pathologist lists something that way, it signals he isn't certain the finding is due to trauma. Discoloration, she explained, can happen for many different reasons, and in a decomposed body, it can simply be a consequence of the decomposition itself. That doesn't rule out injury. She didn't say it did. What she said is that a single observation, on a body in that condition, doesn't carry the weight people have loaded onto it. Then she said something to WXXV News 25, in a conversation with reporter Aubrey Spears, that I think most people following this case have not heard. And it changes what you should expect from a document a lot of the public is still waiting on. The toxicology report. Melinek explained that when a body begins to decompose, especially if it isn't found quickly, bacteria can produce alcohol in the bloodstream. Not alcohol the person drank. Alcohol generated afterwards, biologically, by the process of decomposition. Which means this: if that report comes back showing a small amount of alcohol, it is not necessarily evidence that Nolan had been drinking before he died. It may indicate that bacteria produced it after his death, and that he had none in his system at all. Her conclusion was that the report has to be read in the context of how advanced decomposition was at the time of the first autopsy in order to interpret the findings properly. Take a second with what that means practically. There are people waiting on toxicology as though it will settle the argument. Melinek is saying that the number on the page, whatever it turns out to be, cannot be read on its own. It may be one of the least conclusive documents in the entire file, and I understand why that's frustrating. When a case is this uncertain, everyone starts looking for the one report that ends it. There may not be one. So if the laboratory can't answer this, and time has already taken what it was going to take, then the answer has to come from somewhere else entirely. From people, from records, from the ordinary, unglamorous work of an investigation. And in the final week of July, that work produced an arrest. Just not the one anybody expected. Joseph Alfredo Vasquez Dumarche is 27 years old and lives in Sacramento, California. In the final days of July, he was booked into the Sacramento County Jail on a federal hold, and the complaint against him was unsealed and reported publicly on the 30th and 31st. The charge is interstate transmission of a threatening communication, a federal offense under Title 18. If convicted, he faces up to 5 years in prison, a fine of up to $250,000, and 3 years of supervised release. Let me be clear about this immediately, because the headlines were not. This is not an arrest for Nolan's death. Dumarche was not on Horn Island. He has no connection to anyone who was, and he is charged, not convicted. Everything in that complaint is an allegation that has yet to be tested. So who was he allegedly writing to? Ashley Cole is a Jackson County Chancery Court judge. She is a parent of Warren Hudson, who was among the group that went out to Horn Island on the 4th. The group traveled on 3 boats, and Warren Hudson was not on the same boat as Nolan. He has not been accused of any crime by any authority, and nothing in this segment should be heard as suggesting otherwise. On July 7th, Judge Cole posted a public statement about her family. What followed, according to the federal complaint, included a Facebook Messenger message on July 11th, warning that a package would be arriving at her office. She later said she deactivated her Facebook account entirely because of threats directed at her and at her children. Her husband, Dr. Benjamin Hudson, has offered a $50,000 reward for information leading to an arrest and conviction. He also said his family had received thousands of death threats in 3 weeks. Thousands. In 3 weeks. Now, how the FBI found the sender is worth understanding, because it's a genuine piece of investigative work. Special Agent Brody Gibson's affidavit is dated July 24th. Agents with the Bureau's Safe Streets Task Force traced the account handle YAYA962 through an associated email account, pulling IP data, a date of birth, a phone number, and a street address, then cross-referencing that against Google records and cell phone information. That trail ended roughly 2,000 miles from Mississippi, which leaves a question I can't answer with a document. Why does a man in Sacramento, with no stake in any of this, attach himself to a family's grief at all? And he wasn't the only one who did. On July 31st, federal prosecutors charged Michelle Edwards, 41, of Cincinnati, Ohio. The allegation is that she made false bomb threats. Prosecutors say she dialed *67 to mask her number, then called the George County Chancery Clerk's office just over 20 times inside an 8-minute window on July 23rd, and that she also targeted the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. She faces up to 10 years. She is being held by the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office and will be tried in federal court in Mississippi. She is charged, not convicted, and no connection has been alleged between her and the Sacramento case. The date is worth noting quietly. That arrest happened in Cincinnati on the same day Nolan's parents were standing in Cincinnati. I'll leave that where it is. Now, the second thing, and this one is different in kind. Bart Edmiston Jr. is a college student and a former teammate of Nolan's who was on Horn Island that day. Online, strangers began calling him a suspect. Then came the death threats. Then his home address and photographs of his house published for anyone to see. So his family retained Mississippi attorney Russell Latino, and a cease and desist letter went out over claims that he was a suspect, that he caused or contributed to Nolan's death, or that he took part in a cover-up. I want to be careful here, so let me use only what's on the record. According to ABC News, Edmiston sat for interviews with investigators. He answered the questions he was asked. He compiled a list of potential witnesses. He allowed his phone to be examined, and he turned over photographs, video, and GPS data from his boat. And his attorney has stated plainly that law enforcement has not identified him as a suspect or a person of interest. His family said they had tried to stay quiet out of respect for the Wells family, and that the attacks on their son made silence impossible. And it isn't only him. Christine Wansley has been targeted too. A campaign of bad reviews aimed at her and her workplace. Threatening messages. Harassing mail. Her husband put it into one sentence that has stayed with me. Elmore Wansley said a parent cannot grieve while people are attacking them, attacking their jobs, attacking their character. 2 federal cases, 1 defamation fight, a family being hounded while they wait for answers, and not one word of it brings anyone closer to knowing how Nolan died. On July 30th, officials confirmed it. The Mississippi State Medical Examiner's autopsy is finished. It exists. It's complete. It is going to a grand jury, which will decide whether formal charges should be brought, and it will not be released. Not to the public, not to the press, and not, as of this recording, to Christine and Elmore Wansley. Before anyone reaches for the word cover-up, listen to what the district attorney actually said, because it matters. Angel Myers McElrath is the district attorney for Mississippi's 19th Circuit Court District. On July 23rd, she recorded a statement addressed directly to the people of Jackson County. She said that every death in that county, other than natural causes and non-criminal car wrecks, is presented to a grand jury. She said that has been the practice throughout her entire career, and that many people simply don't know it. Nolan's case, she said, is being handled the same way, with the same care and the same commitment to the truth. Then this. They are not taking time for time's sake. They are taking the time the investigation demands. Mississippi's Public Safety Commissioner, Sean Tyndall, declined to comment on the autopsy's status at all, citing the active investigation. Speaking generally, he said an autopsy of this type would ordinarily be complete by now, so the rule is real, it predates this case, and there's no indication it's being applied selectively here. Sealed is not the same as hidden, but understand what that rule means for two people this week. The document that could answer the question they have been asking since the 4th of July is finished. It is sitting somewhere right now, and they are not allowed to read it. A procedure can be entirely correct and still be almost unbearable to live inside. They have not been waiting passively, though. According to the Sun-Herald, subpoenas have now been issued to Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, Life360, Snapchat, and TikTok, seeking data from Nolan's accounts. Those followed preservation letters sent to Nolan's friends, their families, and local officials, instructing them not to delete any records and stating that litigation is reasonably anticipated. Attorney Eric Hertz said the family's legal team is working toward an agreement with McElrath for a joint examination of cell phone evidence, and that he believes the FBI would be present for it. He also said the district attorney indicated she would be open to reviewing evidence the family's team has gathered. Attorney Liza Park said they're taking over 100 calls a day. And here's something that gets misunderstood constantly. The FBI is not only involved in the threat cases. The Jackson County Sheriff's Department has interviewed dozens of witnesses and has been working with the Bureau on the death investigation itself. As for why those subpoenas exist, Christine Wansley has given her own reason. She has said she found it suspicious that her son's phone appeared to show no Snapchat history from the day he disappeared, and that she noticed discrepancies in location data while she was searching for him. That is a mother's observation. It is not an official finding, and nothing has confirmed it, but it tells you exactly what she is looking for. And on the last day of July, she said something else. Not in a courtroom, in a public square, 800 miles from Mississippi. Fountain Square, downtown Cincinnati. July 31st. Omega Psi Phi fraternity was holding its 85th Grand Conclave Community Day. Close to 100 people had gathered. Cincinnati's city manager, Cheryl Long, was there. So was Vice Mayor Jan Michel Kearney. Nobody in that crowd was expecting Nolan's parents, but Christine Wansley and Elmore Wansley Sr. walked out alongside Ben Crump, more than 800 miles from the island where their son was found, and Christine spoke. According to the Cincinnati Enquirer, she told the crowd that they unfortunately have to be more careful, more observant, and more discerning when they are in spaces with others who do not look like them, and that this was something they had spoken to their children about regularly. I want to stay with one word there. Unfortunately, she wasn't offering that as wisdom. She wasn't proud of it. She chose a word that says she wishes it weren't true, and then she said it anyway, in front of strangers, because her own family's experience had put her there. And this is important. That was a mother describing her lived experience and the conversations she has had with her own children. It was not a claim about what happened on Horn Island. It should not be reported as one, and I'm not reporting it as one. Nolan was Filipino on his mother's side and African American on his father's side. His death has opened a wider conversation among black parents about their children's safety in predominantly white spaces. And his family sits inside that conversation in a way that doesn't reduce to a single category. Crump spoke too. He told the crowd that Black lives matter, and that Nolan's life matters, and that they are going to fight to get to the truth of what happened to Nolan Wells. The Wansleys said what they want is accountability from local authorities, and an investigation that is unbiased and thorough. That was the public part. Then they went home, and went back to waiting. So let me set out plainly where this stands tonight. What is confirmed? Nolan Xavier Wells died at 18. 2 examinations have been performed on his body. The state's is finished and headed to a grand jury. The independent one returned undetermined. Cause and manner both. 2 people now face federal charges connected to threats surrounding this case, and the FBI is working the death investigation alongside the Jackson County Sheriff's Department. What is not resolved? How Nolan entered the water. Whether anyone was with him when he did. What the retained neck structures will show when someone finally examines them. What the toxicology says, and how much of that reading decomposition wrote after the fact. And when the grand jury will sit, because no public date exists. Here is the honest position, and I'm not going to dress it up. Nothing established so far shows that anyone caused Nolan Wells' death. Nothing established so far rules it out. That's uncomfortable. It's also true, and this channel is not going to move past it ahead of the evidence. Strip away the arrests, the pathology, the sealed report, and the noise, and what remains is smaller than all of it. 2 parents asked one question in the first week of July. They are still asking it. If you want to know what the grand jury decides, and what the toxicology finally says, subscribe and stay with us. We'll bring it to you verified, or not at all.